AI expert working with Claude. This is a very simple device that we've been needing for a while where you can now take the text of anything you've written in the past, speech, transcript, essays, books, whatever, toss it into this analyzer device, and it will tell you the two basic metrics here for narrative structure and frequency and the narrative index. For example, I did it just this morning with the entire text of the novel Gone with the Wind, 400, you can see down the lower left there, 428,282 words. And it tells you how it's doing for narrative structure. There's the and frequency, a little on the dull side, which is exactly what you expect in today's world. It was heavy on description in 1939. And the narrative index of 19, just under the 20 range you want to be in there for really compelling drama. But it's with this tool, we someday hope to put an end to the and structure that scientists fall victim to. So that's a little announcement, and put that in the window there for everybody to click on and send to your friends and experiment with. We're still developing a little bit, but thanks to Alistair Trotter for working with us to develop that. So, okay, our guest today, I'm going to give a very brief intro, mostly with this one video clip that kind of says everything. Dr. Osterholm, I met 5 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, in exactly 5 years ago this October. The pandemic had been going for 6 months. I've been complaining to everybody around me about why aren't we doing a better job with communication of this whole problem with COVID. And then I sat down in October 2020 and watched Meet the Press on a Sunday morning, and he was the guest. He's the director of the University of Minnesota's Center for Infectious Disease and Prevention. And here, I'm just going to show you this clip, this excerpt from it, about a minute and a half. And this kind of says everything we need to get the ball rolling here. Here we go. And let me know if there's any technical problems, Matthew. So,
do you have any idea of who's running the federal government public health response at this point? Do you suspect that Dr. Atlas is now the leading scientist in the president's ear, and so therefore dictating policy like potentially herd immunity?
You know, I don't know if there is a lead. There are a lot of different voices, which is part of the problem that I just mentioned. We don't have a consolidated one voice. And this is not just about the science. Right now, what we're about to go into, Chuck, when I was on this show last on September 13th, we had 33,000 cases reported that day. You may recall I warned that we were going to see a very dark fall. Friday, we had 70,000 cases, matching the largest number we had seen back during the really serious peak in July. That number, we're going to blow right through that. And between now and the holidays, we will see numbers much, much larger than even the 67 to 75,000 cases. No one has a good story about what to do there. And what I mean by a story, this is more than just science. This is bringing people together to understand why are we doing this. This is an FDR fireside chat approach, and we're just not doing that.
Okay, with that clip, you can see why I would go so far as to say it's quite possibly that he is my #1 all-time science communication hero. As I heard that, he was just punching all the buttons of our ABT framework, namely talking about the power and importance of a singular voice, and that's still the bane of the entire situation. I want to begin with a quick little exercise with Dr. Osterholm. I just ran through this with Glenn, who'll come on in a moment and match notes with you, but had him come up with his scores. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is complete preparedness and 1 is, or 0 potentially is nothing, let's hit 4 little milestones, starting with 2010. What would you rate our nation's preparedness for pandemic in 2010 on a scale of 1 to 10?
4.
All right. Make a note now. 2015.
4.
And 2020.
Well, you've been winning the year, but I'll go with 5.
Oh, 5. Okay. And then today.
2.
And thus the title of his book, the big one, and what he's going to talk to us a little bit about is our preparation, lack of preparation for a pandemic. And on that note, when I saw that clip, I'd never met Dr. Osterholm, but I got in touch with one of my good buddies there at the Center for Disease Control, Glenn Novak, who for 14 years was head of communications there, and it hosted me in 2010 for one of the greatest days of my career. I spent the first 5 visits there back in the prime time for CDC. And so I got in touch with Glenn, asked him if he knew Dr. Osterholm, said yes, talked to him every few days, introduced me. much to Mike's regret over the next year or two as we collaborate on all kinds of fun activities. But on that note, Glenn, how about if you join us? And Glenn's scores were 7730. And let's just get right into that last digit there for right now. You gave today's preparation level a 0, and Mike gave it a 2. And let you take it from there. What's the discrepancy? Glenn, what do you think?
Well, I don't think there's much of a discrepancy. I think we're so both sort of agreement. I don't know what 2 is going to do much for you. And so I guess I was probably a bit more pessimistic than Mike, having seen what really has to happen back in 2009, 2010, where there was a much more effective response. And as I think I mentioned earlier to you, I think right now we're in a position where the federal government's philosophy is hands off. And this is all pretty much left up to individual states and individual communities. Whereas when I was there in 2007, 8, 9, as part of the pandemic preparedness and response, it was believed to be that the federal government plays a central and major role in terms of coordinating the efforts of a lot of different entities, including the states. So I think with that all gone, that's my 0.
Okay, and let me now add one more person to this conversation since she's only here with us for a few minutes, but our good friend Shirley Malcolm, head of education for AAAS for a long time. And Shirley, if you're there, do you want to ask a question of Dr. Osterholm to get the ball rolling? And Shirley unmuting, hopefully. And while we're waiting for Shirley, Mike, you want to give us some thoughts on preparedness level?
Well, actually,
you're waiting for Shirley to unmute.
Oh,
Shirley
okay,
is
there's
now
Shirley.
unmuted.
Got a question.
Shirley is unmuted. I guess that the question I have is, how can you really screw up that badly? In the sense that everybody kind of translated this into the technical problem as opposed to the human challenge of dealing with all this. And it sounds like they were listening only to the technical people. So where are the voices of us who deal with these other kinds of things? Where do we come in?
Yes, exactly. Mike.
yeah, well, first of all, let me just say I don't think Glenn and I are that far off. My 2 actually is a average of -7 and 3. Okay, you might say. I think that the rest of the world is in a different place today with pandemic preparedness than we are by far than they were pre-2020. If you look at vaccine research, you look at the Coalition Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, et cetera, these groups that now exist. We are beyond any kind of description of free fall. As you may know, we're watching the situation with the vaccine world deteriorate quickly under Mr. Kennedy's leadership. We're losing, for example, the mRNA vaccine. I think most people may not be aware of this, but right now, the global capacity to make influenza vaccine, should we have an influenza pandemic using the embryated chicken egg, which is the way we do grow most of the virus, it would take us about 15 months before we'd have enough vaccine to vaccinate a fourth of the world. It would take us 2.5 to 3 years before we'd have enough to have vaccine for the world. mRNA technology was a major hope for us to basically make vaccine for the world in a year, and a vaccine that was equally effective, if not more effective, than the current one we have. That's been largely taken off the table now by the administration for no good reason. Original reason was the vaccines were not safe, they were not beneficial. The second reason that was given a week later, when that didn't seem to float as well, the public won't trust them anymore because, what we're saying. So therefore, we're not going to invest in them because they don't trust them. So I think that the challenge is that. I think to get to Shirley's point, Shirley, right now, there is no one really in charge except what I would consider the far, far, far crazies. And I don't know how else to say that. If you want to watch an example of theater, at the very least, go look at the War Room episode that Mr. Bannon just had with Stephen Hadfield a week ago. in which the number of lies and, total misrepresentation of information was there. On top of that, I happen to take this one more personally. They named me by name and said I was a demon and that I was responsible for a lot of these people dying from the vaccine, which, doesn't give me comfort at night knowing, what
Well,
went
okay.
on here.
On that note, a couple of little things. In fact checking yourself, and that clip jumping back to 5 years was kind of flashback. Um, from the outset, you were making very dire predictions, and most, if not all of them, came true, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another thing from back then was just a month or two after you and I met. I remember one day you were on a 2 hour Zoom session with the whole Biden advisory team council. He put together the 13, you were one of the 13 advisors, and we talked, and then everything you talked about was all technical. And I said, where were the communications people? And you said they were on the call, but they didn't speak up pretty much. And I think from the Biden administration did just as bad a job of what Shirley's talking about there, which was they got the brain trust of the science world, but they didn't get any brain trust of the communications world, which I think is what you were pointing out in that clip there. And is that mindset changed at all, at least with the science community?
Well, right now, the science community is largely under attack in such a way that there are very few of us that are able to stick our head above the table. Many universities are indicating to their employees, don't say a damn word, keep your head under the table, because they're so afraid. I mean, the fact that I at Minnesota have been able to do what we've done with the Vaccine Integrity Project, this group of working in the vaccines, et cetera, is an exception, not the rule. So I think the science community has got to understand what they're giving up by not taking this on. And I realize it's a risk. I've had already official reviews of all funding that I've gotten from the federal government to see about it being pulled, et cetera. But now is not the time for us to pull back. We need to push back.
Let me bring in another question. Steve Kern, who is the CEO of Global Health Labs in Seattle. They're supported by the Gates Foundation for their global work in public health. Steve's been partner with us for the last 3 years or so. Steve, you got a question for Mike?
Well, I think, to Shirley's point about so what ideas, Mike, would you say we could do to actually effectively push back, not as individuals, not that that's in any way not important, but collectively? Is there a collective way we can start to build some momentum? Because I take your point, that I'm fortunate to not sit in an academic role where I'm worried about that threat, but it's real. I completely understand that, having been in academics before. So what do you think would be ways that we could start to collectively push back for impact?
Well, first of all, start with creative imagination. Imagine what once was and what you want for the future. And I think that's a big one. Let me just briefly explain what I'm talking about. The night of the election, after it was clear to me that Mr. Trump was going to win, I went and pulled out the 2025 document and again went through all the public health issues. And I went, oh my God. And, I'm 72 years old. People are expecting me to retire one day soon. I wrote an email that night saying, well, I'm in for the next 4 years for certain. Okay. I'm not leaving. And from that, we formed the Vaccine Integrity Project because we saw what was going to happen with vaccines. And then when Mr. Kennedy was actually named as the likely HHS secretary needing confirmation, that confirmed it. So what we did is, as a group, and was able to get funding from Christy Walton's foundation, Alumbra, to take this issue on, is we brought together a team of real experts on vaccines, public health, et cetera, and they were willing to go there. More importantly, our university got behind me. The president is an ER doc who spent 25 years doing gun violence epidemiology. She's a pretty tough lady. Said, do what's right. And we're under investigation at Minnesota. And what we did is we created this group, the Vaccine Integrity Project, that actually came up with 8 different priorities that needed to be done that couldn't be done now because the federal government was going to do them. The Advisory Communication Practices was done in, okay? So what we did is we formed kind of an ACIP-like group, and just yesterday we reported on the results. We just did an intent a survey where we basically just went through 17,600 articles that addressed anything around COVID, influenza, or RSV vaccines for the fall season. They need this now. This information. The ACIP used to do that. We did it, and we just empowered ourselves, and we got all the medical societies to agree to participate because they needed the database. So yesterday, the Academy of Pediatrics announced their vaccine recommendations, and they're based largely on the data that we generated for them. Now, people told us 5 months ago, you can't do this. Okay, this only ACIP can do this. They told us you couldn't do it in the amount of time that you have. We did it. I think it's about being creative. What are the other advisory groups out there that need to be stood up in a way that are shadow advisory groups? You'll never replace the actual government agency or advisory group by statute. They have different authorities and responsibilities, but you can still do a lot. And so I find it not helpful to keep getting all my emails to say, sign this letter or this letter to say how bad these people are. That doesn't do any good. Doesn't have any impact at all. Okay. But I think by coming up with what I think is the kind of actionable items like we're doing right now, we're now taking on the measles vaccine next to do that review because we know that the administration is going to go after that in the next several weeks.
Okay, but when
Yeah,
you say we, going back to that clip, the thing that first pulled me into the voice that you were presenting was you're complaining we're not speaking with one voice. Is the community closer to speaking with one voice because you're up
No,
against?
no,
Yeah,
no. When I
exactly.
say we, it's 24 individuals who have been willing. They're from Mass General, they're from Boston City, they're from Penn, they're from McGill, from Minnesota, from Stanford, a number of different places where we brought this group together. And it's surely we don't represent the body of science out there. The vast majority of my colleagues, particularly in the research areas of vaccine work, epidemiology, they're all have their head under the table.
Okay, well, let me toss out one little principle for you to maybe take away from this, from my realm of the storytelling world, which is the great and mighty screenwriter that we had in film school, Frank Daniel. One of his core principles was always, your story is only as good as your villain is evil. And what that means is, for example, with RFK Jr., the more evil he becomes, the more powerful the story, the more you can motivate everybody. Part of the problem going on a lot with people like him and Trump, all of them, every time they do one small thing that looks like a good thing, and like this Fruit Loops and food dyes and things like that, they're watering down your ability to take them down because they're not as
Yeah.
evil. It's just about this one-dimensional thing in a world of too much information. And I wonder if a lot of these communications people understand that that's a lot of they're aware of that tactic, and I think Bannon in particular knows if you throw in two or three little good things there, you really undermine the opposition to pull you down with the power of villainizing. You got thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. You and I've had this discussion before. I think the challenge I have right now is I can't even find a good thing among the things that they're putting out there. I mean, right
But the
now,
public is. The public's finding bits and pieces of RFK Jr., that food
no,
dye thing. Yeah.
yeah, you're right to the extent on the food side, but not on the vaccine side. I think right now that part of it is if you believe that the vaccines are dangerous and should be taken off the market, you're going to think RFK is brilliant.
Well,
If
then
you don't,
let's
you see him as a villain.
yeah, okay, Glenn, how about if you pick up what we were talking about before we got started there on that very point about Glenn saying nobody even cares.
Well, I think it's one of the challenges. So Mike's, I haven't obviously read his book because it hasn't come out yet, but I'm sure it's full of really good advice on how to prepare. But I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is there are a lot of key decision makers who don't care, right? I mean, so you can give them a really good roadmap, but if their response is, I don't care. So I guess it's just interesting your thoughts, Mike, about, any thoughts about how we address that lack of caring, particularly among key policymakers or even among voters, to get them to care about some of these things that they're currently saying, I don't need to be
Yeah.
interested in it?
I think it's a divide and conquer world right now in the sense that I think there are people who do care a lot. I think the challenge we have is identifying them and how you reach them and what can they do about something. I mean, a good example is, we were challenged, and I do a biweekly podcast to give the listeners steps that they can do to engage. How can they get more involved? And we put together a list of organizations at the state and local levels that are actually involved with promoting vaccines, et cetera. And we gave them some ideas on tools. For example, right now, one of the areas we're seeing major activities is state legislatures where these groups are putting in, for example, Minnesota had a bill submitted that would outlaw as a felony using mRNA technology as any kind of medical intervention. So if you give one shot, it's a felony. Um, Monitoring that and making sure it doesn't move through the system, we've empowered people to do that now. We're seeing community grassroots activities that are taking place there. Now, is that a majority of the public? No. Is it people? Ironically, you know who it is? I think it's even more grandparents than parents. But it's a movement that's starting to move in that way. They're not involved with the food side, they're involved with vaccines only. I think this is where the divide and conquer comes from. When you can look at the climate issues right now, and they're so apparent that some of the challenges that are happening. Look at the financial issues around the climate change. How many people invested heavily in green technology only to have those investments ripped apart? So I think that to me is what we're trying to do is take whatever victory we can get wherever we can.
Well, and
And,
let
and
me we're on the last 5 minutes for you since you,
sure,
you got to go at the half hour, but let me bring
yeah,
on Henry Blumberg from Emory University Medical School, and he's one of our partners in our
yeah.
ABT training. And let's talk about the insanity factor and the little anecdote you told me a couple months ago about you guys had a study there that I think was NIH funded that got canceled. And nobody could figure out why that was. And eventually they looked at the title, and it was a study on T cells, and the title was what?
What
Diver
diversity of T cell responses or something
yeah,
like that? Because I think Doge was just doing
Yeah.
word
yeah,
searches for like diversity, and so it picked up on that.
yeah. So you want to pick up on that, and I got a question for Mike.
Um, I guess to follow up on some of the questions is, um, you know, what can people do to push back? I think most people are feeling like very helpless right now. I think some people are working through their professional societies, to come up with like alternative recommendations from the governments on vaccination or other things as those things get dismantled. But I think a lot of people aren't, there's just so much stuff going on right now. Like, um, you know, people are trying to figure out, what can they do to help out the cause?
Yeah, I don't have a magic bullet answer. I wish I did. I gave you the example what we're doing. We're putting 100 hours a weekend per person right now on this because we're taking on the vaccines with Mr. Kennedy head on. And I think that any type of these types of projects that have had legs, have contributed to what we hope would be a better world, but have been shut down, go after them. Figure out how to get them back up again. Do it, don't take no for an answer, and find constructive ways to do this outside of government. Eventually, I think this will cause them to have to respond to this. I mean, Mr. Kennedy went on a tirade yesterday about the Academy of Pediatrics' new vaccine recommendations based on our work, okay? I mean, we got to him. We didn't get to put sand in the eye. We put a damn dump truck in his eyes, and I think that that's the message you want to get right now is what can we do? What is my area? I keep telling the basic researchers, you got to be able to stick your head above the table. If you can't do that, then don't expect that you're going to do much. And don't keep just signing letters. That doesn't make any difference.
Yeah,
Okay. And
That's
I think the message is, what can you do? And I think that's, what we're doing
okay.
is
And
active.
at the risk of giving you terrible flashbacks to our collaboration 5 years ago, let's finish by asking you for your book coming out. What is the therefore of your book overall?
There is, let me just say, I had the unique experience of being at HHS right after 9/11, splitting my time between Minnesota and working for Tommy Thompson. And as a result of that, I got in on a lot of the 9/11 follow-up in the 9/11 Commission. I saw what a bipartisan group could do to come up with summary information about what changes should be made, what lessons should have been learned. And they did that in the spirit, I think, of helping our country. We didn't have that happen with COVID. It's
Right.
just the opposite. What
Why
we
why
did,
why didn't it happen?
because the politically divided Washington, D.C. didn't want to have it because of the fact that it would open up who said, she said, she said. I mean, one of the things I've tried really hard is to get people to move off the Wuhan issue. We're never going to know where that virus came from. So damn it, get on what are we going to do when the next one comes along, whether it's a lab leak or it's a spillover, either one. We're so fixated on the past. And so I think that we're bound to this kind of argument right now about did he do it or didn't he do it? And we can't get past that.
Yeah.
So that to me is right now the book is all about I'm trying to give what might be the 9/11 like lessons that we should have and could have learned. They're not partisan. They're just straightforward. Think if it had been different like this.
And I think that what's always resonated for me and everything you have to say is your Iowa upbringing, your Midwest sensibility, and your just plain speak, basically. Even that clip that I played there at the beginning, you ended by talking about fireside chats from Roosevelt and how we ever bring things back around to that level of discourse. Who knows? But I think you just keep plowing away and that you've certainly got.
Can I just add, Randy, you'll like this because the book
Uh-oh.
actually is in parts both fictional and non-fictional. Every chapter is has a scenario that is based on over time an emerging new pandemic, and the content of the nonfiction is tied to what that scenario is, where it's at, all the way down the line. And one of the things that is we have a president that does do the fireside chats in this particular scenario, and actually the benefit of what happened with that. And we tout that.
Oh, that is excellent. Well, I will be one of the first to get a copy when it comes out. So looking forward to that. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody,
Thank
stick around.
you.
Let's talk some more and keep this conversation
Thank you
going.
all very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's a privilege to work with Randy. You all know that.
I wouldn't go that far. um, excellent. Let's see, Steve, Glenn, you guys want to make a comment on picking up where he's left off there? Glenn.
Sure. No, I think a lot of really sound advice. I think one of the other things is divide and conquer probably is the way, but I think you have to have somebody to coordinate those collaborations. I think that's one of the things that we oftentimes fail to realize is that a lot of the other sides of these things are very well coordinated and there's a lot of collaboration going on and they're unified by what they're trying to accomplish. And I think we need to kind of emulate some of that. And have someone direct the effort.
Well, it was a little distressing to hear his answer on that, which is, how are we 5 years later and addressing this one voice? That's what you're talking about right there. Where's the leadership? And I think his answer is it ain't any better than it was before. Steve?
No. Yeah, and the interesting part, I think, Glenn, is that it's easier when you're trying to tear things down to be uncoordinated and impactful, right? And so back to my point that I wrote in the chat about saying one good thing and 9 bad things, right? You don't need a singular voice. You just need a bunch of noise out there that every once in a while is touching a dopamine, burst because I said something good. Oh, thank God you're going to make my Fruit Loops safer, right? But then, does 9 things that are terrible. So I think what Mike is getting at, which I think is a really key point, is let's find, he started on one thing, right, with this shadow ACIP group. So now how do we take 1 and make it 2? And then once we have 2 that are effective, how do we take 2 and make it 4? And then how do we make 4 and to make it 8, right? I think it looks too overwhelming to think about attacking it on all fronts. But if you take some examples of here's success, oh, let's follow that playbook. Let's duplicate it now. There's 2 successes. Let's duplicate it now. That's 4 successes. That's a good way to do it. And mRNA technology is probably one of the best ways to start, I think, because as I wrote, I was just laughing, cynically reading Martin McCrary's piece in JAMA about how he's espousing how during the pandemic, we could approve things in under a year. That was great. Wasn't that great? But now we're going to get rid of that mRNA, which is bad, right? That was the thing we approved in under a year, you idiot, right? So it's like, come on, we got to, we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. And so I think if we can focus on a couple of wins, show what good looks like, then that can potentially last.
For the benefit of a bunch of us here, can you give us a little 1 to 2 minute tutorial on what's happening with mRNA? Give us the and but therefore of it, basically. What's the setup? What was the dream scenario with mRNA and what's happened?
Well, I mean, imagine if we could rapidly produce a vaccine that's uniquely tailored to a new pathogen that we've never seen it before and mass produce it in a rapid format. That would be great. But The problem is when we did that, people assigned bad outcomes, which happen on any time you're involving hundreds of thousands of people in any kind of intervention. There will be bad outcomes that happen. People are assigning them to the technology in a way that basically is causing it to be thrown over under the boat or under the car, under the bus, I guess is the phrase. Therefore, we've got to really get that out and have people appreciate the risk benefit in a realistic way for mRNA and really salvage that technology before it gets, essentially thrown to the waste heap.
Yeah. Matthew, you seen some comments in the chat window that might want to share broadly?
Yeah, Anahita has a nice comment about critical thought versus our nervous systems.
Anahita, join us and share this thought, please.
I mean, I don't have anything to add besides what I wrote, honestly. It's my
Well,
yeah.
for our YouTube audience who can't see
Oh,
the chat.
sure. I can read it. I just wrote, alas, there continues to be no substitute for critical thinking, and there's no way to think critically when our nervous systems are threatened. Creative imagination is inaccessible when we're used to living under scarcity and with fear. I tell even my 7-year-old twins that we cannot problem solve when our bodies don't feel safe. So if we expect to use our whole brains and to think creatively, we're going to have to address a few basics first.
Yeah, precisely. I also think that what worries me is these two media master manipulator minds of Trump and Bannon, and the idea that they look at our society in a different way. They've got a different background, they've got different intuition because they come out of the world of media production, and both of them were involved with that. And Bannon is the guy who coined this phrase that in this context of flood the zone. That comes from his deep understanding of how media works and saturating people's, and that's sort of more common version of what you're just talking about there, Anahita, is that overwhelming people with this stuff, you end up breaking their focus and they can't get anything done. And it seemed like a lot of what Mike was talking about there was along those lines. And that was really interesting. He hit that several times. Don't waste time on signing petitions. What'd you think about that, Matthew? Did you like his Iowa logic and plain reasoning with everything?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we Iowa people are all right. We just, it's all that we can do to keep the rest of you together. That seems to be our 24/7 job. Dean Penchef, you were having some interesting things to say in chat.
So, whoops, sorry, doing the unmute thing. Yeah, two things came to mind. One is I'm reminded of this need for central message and central coordination. To me, is very reminiscent of the message that we learned from Naomi Oreskes' work with the climate change deniers and the tobacco deniers, which was, it turned out to be a tiny, tiny core of people who were responsible for those entire campaigns that the rest of us didn't even realize were tightly coordinated campaigns until long after they were over. So where are the tiny core of people that we could solicit and fund to be that central coordinating messaging body? But then the sub question is, has the world changed enough that that kind of approach is almost impossible to achieve today? The approach that the tobacco health deniers and the climate change deniers were able to pull off. Maybe we can't emulate that anymore. I don't know. I don't have a good enough sense of the media landscape, how to do that.
Karen, you're one of our voices in the climate community. Do you want to share your thoughts there?
Karen might not be able to since she's at jury duty right now. So.
Oh,
yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Oops, sorry about that. Called on the wrong person. But yeah, it just, I'm trying to think what I'm taking away from our half hour with the voice of leadership there with Mike Osterholm. And I hate to call it pessimistic, but man, several of the things that he came out with. I asked him in 5 years since his complaint that we're not speaking with one voice, is there any progress? And it seemed like no, and he's still fighting these same battles. God, I know he's been targeted heavily by the right. I mean, he's a real warrior in that regard. That's a whole topic we could have brought up with him, is how much they just assaulted him. Also, another thing I probably should have brought up with him was in March, just a month after the pandemic began, he ended up, Joe Rogan invited him on the Joe Rogan podcast and Mike had no idea who Joe Rogan was, but Mike's son's a lawyer and explained to him, yes, you should do this. And so he was on there for 2 hours in March, I think of maybe April of 2020, and really a huge public service that he did for everybody. He sat there for 2 hours, explained, and to Joe Rogan's semi credit in that particular session, he yielded to Mike and let him explain to everybody what this virus is and coronavirus and everything else, what a pandemic is. It was a really good education exercise right there at the beginning before everything started going south and all the skeptics started finding each other and banding together through the internet. And then it just got worse and worse. And then about 3 years later, he ended up being invited to come back. You may remember what happened was Spotify turned on Joe Rogan back when some of these internet institutions or social media institutions used to turn on voices of misinformation. And they put the pressure on him. And one of the things they pressured him to do was get some voices from the mainstream science world. And so he had Osterholm come back and do a session. And that's, if you heard a little bit of tension between Mike and me, that was one of our bad experiences, was that he went and did it. I tried to give him suggestions, and I felt that he just got used that time around it was basically Joe Rogan using Mike to validate his voice, and a lot of it was about the Wuhan thing. And unfortunately, when you go on a podcast like that, you're kind of a puppet of them, or it's their show and you're just there as an actor. And so that was kind of a bad experience. And I think that, over the course of those years, it all shifted like that. Glenn, you got thoughts on that sort of stuff? And did you follow those instances with Osterholm and trying to be a voice for the masses, mass education?
Well, I think it's hard because I think oftentimes the assumption is that just facts and information, and educational effort will achieve whatever outcome you're striving for. And a lot of this is about emotion, right? I mean, and that's what your ABT is about. Is it's not and it's somehow tapping people at a visceral and emotional level to do what it is that you want them to do or support. And I think that's the other challenge, is that I think they're when you go into so many areas like the current administration is, and anger so many different groups in so many different places, you just end up helping yourself by creating a lot more noise. So you don't actually find or hear the common things that those people have, right? Because at the end of the day, I think you need to have the kind of simple messages that, what these people are doing are hurting people, and here's how. But if you piss off a lot of people and all those people have different grievances, you just create noise and you can't actually hear the main themes.
Well, what's your feeling on the voice of leadership of the journalism world right now? I mean, the roof is collapsing in so many of these different media outlets. They're just scoring one victory after another against journalism and basic free expression. You got some thoughts on that?
Well, it's going to be a hard space because most of those large media outlets have shifted in the past 10 years. It used to be they invested in journalists and they invested in investigative reporting and doing stories. And then they discovered you could get more money if you just took and wrote opinions and viewpoints. And it's a lot less expensive to generate opinions and viewpoints than it is to actually go out and do real journalism. And so I think it's one of the things you're up against, is that we are now swimming in viewpoints and opinions. A lot of these large media enterprises, that's what they market. I mean, is viewpoints and opinions. And then people can gravitate toward the ones they like, ignore the ones they don't. And now you create the bubbles, and the bubbles are self-reinforcing. So I don't know journalism is going to be the place. I mean, it's going to have to be voters probably, and hopefully, there are good efforts next year when there are elections that are meaningful that could actually change things, that there are really good candidates with really good and compelling stories.
I have quoted for years. In 2010, I was at a big climate event in DC, at which, at the end of the day, a woman stood up and said, "Today, inside the Beltway, there are at least 20 different environmental groups, all communicating about climate, each in their own different way, proudly having their own brands, and the public's just lost." 20 voices coming at them, spinning their heads in circle. It gets back to the same thing. With the retirement of Fauci, Mike is kind of like, I would say, the number one voice. He's certainly, he was on Rachel Maddow last week. That was what cued me to invite him to come do this with us. And who else really, has got that level of media experience and savvy at this point to be a lead voice as this goes along? Hopefully he gets a fair amount of coverage next month when his book comes out. You point to anybody else that you think is, I mean, nobody from NIH now is filling the void from Fauci, right?
No, and it probably isn't going to have to, it probably for the time being can't come from government. It's going to have to be people who are outside of government, perhaps former high-ranking government people who have the expertise, but they have to have the wherewithal to do it and the means to be able to execute it.
Yeah. And do you see any sort of fraying in RFK Jr.'s position of authority? I mean, you keep seeing these optimistic articles on the media from the left that he's losing it or whatever, but it seems to me he's kind of continuing to gather momentum. Is there much talk about that in your program?
Well, there are efforts, and most of them are off the radar, below the surface. You can't see them. And again, they haven't borne fruit. I think there are people working hard trying to get people who voted for his confirmation to change their mind and to do something to remove him. I still think it's going to be hard because politicians are driven by two things: votes and money. And if they don't see a change in either of those things, they're not motivated to change themselves, right? I mean, if their money is still coming in at the levels it has, and they're still getting, they don't see anything in the polls that makes them worried, it's hard to get change.
Yeah. Rick, did you want to make that comment about your age-old favorite expression?
Well, so a number of years ago, I went to a conference in Missoula. That's where I first met Randy. And they had a whole session on conservation social science, which was kind of not a new thing, but certainly an entire morning session on that was unique. And one of the presenters made a statement that I've not been able to track down who said it. She didn't take credit for it, but it stuck with me and does to this day. And she said, all conservation problems are social, but we give them to biologists to solve. And Glenn, when you were making that same comment, that it just hit me that that's exactly what we're dealing with, right? All these problems are, we're giving them to the scientists to solve. And as we kind of all know, scientists aren't real good at communicating. So that just struck me again that it keeps popping up over and over in my world as a conservation biologist, and apparently it's true everywhere.
Yeah, and that was what I was kind of tossing to Osterholm was I mentioned that thing about Biden's committee that he put together from the outset was the best and the brightest, which was nice in theory, but it didn't have that social dimension to it, And I have looked at the two teams that he put together and counted the number of MDs and PhDs, and basically almost everybody there was either an MD or PhD or an MPH. They were all from the technical side of things. And then they never put together any sort of blue ribbon panel of how to communicate this stuff. I mean, it just keeps on going like that. Will that ever change?
I see it daily. I mean, it doesn't change. I mean, okay, I'll speak from my perspective from a specific discipline in ecology. None of us went into this discipline because we liked hanging out with people. We wanted to be out in the middle of nowhere, grabbing, bagging, and tagging, and had no interest in working with people. And then we got thrust into those arenas many times. We don't know how to do it. We're really bad at it.
Yeah. Matthew, got some other comments and thoughts? Share from the chat.
Dean had some ideas as to a singular message, if you wanted to share those.
And we're coming here for the home stretch.
So yeah, I was just thinking what Dr. Osterholm had said about the interest coming from parents and grandparents, and trying to think of
what was it he said about grandparents? That was interesting.
So they are the people who seem to be concerned about vaccines, and he didn't say this outright, but I think that because they perceive that they would like their grandchildren to survive, and it just seems to me that maybe that is potentially a core of a very singular message, which is just directed to people like that, which is that simply without these vaccines, your children and your grandchildren will die. And there's just not much that I can think of that's more fear engendering than that.
You know, let me toss out one little parallel factor, just because this grandparenting thing is really interesting. There's Mark Harris, is longtime faculty member at USC, who won 3 Oscars for his documentaries on the Holocaust, and I've talked with him quite a bit about World War II stuff. And one little factoid he shared with me was that what happened with the Holocaust survivors was that they shared very little with their children, but their grandchildren, they came forward and shared it with them. What's going on there with the grandparenting dynamic like that? But that's a parallel to what he's talking about, the grandparents being more motivated to really become active on that. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
I'll just chime in on that, which is that I think that may be a slightly different situation in that we're talking about people who had a personal trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's pretty close to them, they're not going to be willing to talk about it for very understandable reasons. By the time several decades have gone by and they have grandchildren, it becomes possible for them, I think, to talk about it. What we're not talking about here is people who had a vaccine trauma. That just doesn't happen, as those of us who are in biology know. It's a question of trying to
Yeah,
activate
but
the
wait
concern.
a second, wait a second. There is a knowledge base of grandparents of today. They're a generation that did see health consequences from vaccines coming around and solving a whole lot of problems, and that more recent generations haven't seen as dramatic as of an impact as what went on with some of those older people in that sort of memory base, I think. Don't you think?
Point
Hearing that?
taken. Yes, that may be true. Although, Randy, you and I are getting old enough that, I'm not sure that I think we may be looking at people who are older than we are because vaccines have been so successful for so long now that even the grandparents of today have grew up in a vaccine world, except really old grandparents.
Yeah, true. We're in the last 7 or 8 minutes. Matthew, somebody else got something to say?
Donna Shaver, you had some sympathies to share with Rick about conservation. Would you like to share those?
Um, as well as Kent Holsinger, you got a comment there?
I was just pointing out, I think I found the quotation Rick Nelson was referring to. I think it's from an article in Wildlife Conservation in 1992 by George Schaller.
Oh, he was a big chief
Great.
in conservation biology, right?
Yes.
What was he? He worked in Africa, did he?
Yeah, and wildlife conservation generally.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Um,
This is
Thanks,
Donna
Ken.
Cheever. Can you hear me now?
yes,
Yes,
yes.
we can hear you.
Yes, I want to applaud what you said, Rick. I'm also involved in conservation, and I've had a tremendously troubling problem for nearly 6 years now, and other officials have just wanted to keep their head under the table, and it just has not resolved itself. We need both people that are scientists that stand up, but also a public contingent along with us, I think, to make change.
Let me see if I can, any chance, Mark Dowie, you'd feel motivated to share a couple thoughts with us on that topic. You're one of the grand experts on conservation and environmental efforts, or not feeling like sharing with us, wanting to just to listen in. But that is certainly a yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry I only picked up really about half of what she was saying. I was preoccupied with something. But yeah, I mean the whole environmental message that we've been getting for the last probably 50 years has been overdriven by conservation as the alleged major force of environmentalism when it really is only one of many aspects and forces of in the environmental issue. And I mean, I consider myself a conservationist and not an environmentalist. I'm really a journalist. Hold it. Sorry. Anyway, sorry. If you had to keep me earlier, I would have been paying more attention, Randy.
Oh, no problem. But it was this basic quote that Rick had offered up, which is that why is it that these issues of conservation, but really it parallels to the whole pandemic, keep being given to scientists to solve when in fact they're social issues. That dynamic.
Sure.
Did you have any thoughts on that over the ages?
Well, I mean, I think what you have done with the whole business of communicating science is something that environmentalists can learn a lot from you about. And you should have more environmental activists and more environmental communicators up on the screen because they really do need the ABT lesson that you're teaching and preaching.
We're working on it.
Good.
Let's see. Okay, last 5 minutes here, Matthew. Anybody else been waiting to say a comment or two?
Jeff Jolie, you had something interesting to say. Care to share it?
Sure. It's a little bit cynical, but I hear it applies to a lot of issues that are out there right now, that the only way you're going to motivate the public is to have them be touched personally by it. Therefore, they need to see the consequences of these bad things in order to see a shift. If it gets to that stage, the narrative is going to be much different. The shame and blame game will take a different flavor. So I don't know, it's more for discussion. Who would take narrative leadership at that point, and how would they do that?
Boy, that's that parallels to one of our principles in the ABT training, which what we labeled the Liz moment, which is we see this a lot. People say ABT is great, it's great. It's not until they finally use it in some big presentation and have that life-altering moment they come back to us like, oh, I get it now. And that's sort of what you're talking about, isn't it, Jeff? That how can you get people to have that moment? I mean, that starts to grade right into religion, I guess. You want everybody to have their religious moment, like, oh, I've seen the light. That's really kind of what it is.
I've seen the light of the ABT. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Yeah. And the same thing as you're talking about for all of these issues, getting people motivated for them. Matthew, last couple comments out of the chat. Doug, yes, Doug, share with us.
Doug has a beautiful ABT to share with us, or he can talk about a different topic if he likes.
Really, I think it speaks for itself. Well, you can read it if you want. I'm just here. I'm just here curled up in a ball in the fetal position underneath my bed after listening to Dr. Osterholm.
I got to say, I'm kind of in agreement with you. That was pretty grim, half an hour. Yikes. Okay, sorry.
My ABT, Dr. Osterholm, is brilliant. And if we listen to him, we can avoid an even bigger catastrophe than COVID. But, it just left the screen. Oh, but we're all doomed because he'll be in an El Salvadorian prison in short order, and we'll all be dead from the next big one. Therefore, tonight I'm going to party like it's 1999. Thanks for a great and terrifying session.
God.
Doug Passon, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Grim Reaper, for pulling it all together and synthesizing the entire experience. And Julie Clausen, you want to give us your assessment of the whole presentation there? It's not a full session without hearing something from Julie.
She can't talk.
Can't talk. Okay, must be a jury duty too. Let's see, Matthew. Any last one or two folks? Wrap it up here. Yes. Hey, Rocky, how you doing? Yes.
Yeah, good. So I'd like to talk about this conservation issue, and it speaks to the broader point. The comment that was attributed to Schaller actually goes way back in wildlife management, and where people have said that managing wildlife is 90% managing people and 10% managing animals, which alludes to this problem. And I had the experience working with spotted owls of getting involved in conservation conflicts, which is a lot of what we're talking here. But we realized, a number of colleagues, that this is a much bigger problem. As a result, we got together with European colleagues and published a book on conservation conflicts, in which we brought together people from all fields, philosophy, economics, biology, whatnot, to give their perspective on what that field could bring to solutions in wildlife management and conservation. And one of the things I took away from doing that book was a philosopher from Cambridge who said that, and somebody had mentioned this just a few seconds ago, which prompted this comment, was that people don't change their basic core philosophy unless something dramatic happens to them. And you mentioned that you have this epiphany with ABT when you give a talk, you realize how effective it might be. But in the case of what we're talking about here with vaccines, for example, I think we're going to have to experience something really traumatic.
Yeah.
Likewise with the economy, people are going to have to actually suffer before they see everything that this flood zone shit is a bunch of lies.
Yeah, I think Mike would have agreed with you on that exactly. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna write to him about that when we wrap up here. And in fact, Rick, Rocky, Kent, the three of you, and let's see one or two others. But during July when we were off, I was trading emails with both you, Rick and Rocky, about the idea of doing a special session on conservation biology stuff. So this is great to finish on this note here. And that's what we'll incubate for maybe next week or the week after that. But let's do a special one, Matthew, on because we got all these folks here that have really a lot of experience and dealing with these conservation biology issues in today's world, particularly. So, all right, that we are at the top of the hour. Thank you, Rocky, for offering that up to pull. That's a little more optimistic note to finish on to counterbalance Doug's grim Reaper ABT. But I agree. You know, you're right, Doug. That was he didn't have a lot of joy for us. I mean, look at the title of his book, The Big One. So, all right, everybody, pre-order your copy of The Big One, and we will tune in next week. And thanks everybody for showing up. This is a really good discussion. And by the way, it's recorded. We'll post it next tomorrow. I think I'll send the note out to everybody. Share it with all your friends. It was really a great little rundown from Osterholm where we are with everything. So, thanks. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.